I'm H.W. Brands. I teach history at the University of Texas at Austin, and I'm the author of America First, Roosevelt versus Lindbergh in the Shadow of War. This is a book about the American debate over whether the United States should join the war against Germany that began in 1939. The debate takes place between 1939 and 1941. It's during that period that the United States debates this question: does the war in Europe, which was originally Germany against France and Britain, but then Germany against Britain, did that war sufficiently engage American interests that the United States should take the risk, incur the expense of going to war, uh, with the possibility of losing hundreds of thousands of American lives? There were two views on this. One was the view that was principally espoused by Franklin Roosevelt, that what was happening in Europe was vitally important to the future of American democracy, to the future of American prosperity. Roosevelt had to treat this question carefully because when my story begins, again, September 1939, when Germany invades Poland, most Americans were opposed to the idea that the United States should go to war in Europe. America had gone to war in Europe in World War I, and most Americans came out of that experience believing it had been a really bad idea, and it would be an even worse idea to repeat the mistake. But Roosevelt took the position that Nazi Germany was such a threat to the stability of Europe, and that threat would come across the Atlantic eventually and entangle the United States. And so Roosevelt initially proposed aid to the Allies fighting against Germany. But when that didn't suffice, Roosevelt took the United States closer and closer to war and eventually into the war. Opposing Franklin Roosevelt was Charles Lindbergh. Charles Lindbergh was a celebrity. He was a famous aviator. He was the first man to fly across the Atlantic Ocean in a single hop. This occurred in 1927, and he became a darling of Americans as a result of this. He was a well-known figure. His celebrity turned to tragedy in the early 1930s when his and his wife's infant son was kidnapped and murdered. This became known as the crime of the century. It led to the trial of the century. And Lindbergh was basically the most recognizable figure in America. He was opposed to the idea of American intervention in the affairs of Europe, partly because his father had been a member of Congress from Minnesota in World War I, had opposed the war, and had been badly treated politically by the Wilson administration for his opposition. And Lindbergh thought, first of all, that politics was a nasty business. He didn't want to get involved at all. But secondly, that if the United States repeated the mistake it had made in World War I, the US would never get out of Europe. And in addition, and this was one of his biggest criticisms, the way that Roosevelt was moving the United States toward war increased the power of the president. Roosevelt seemed to be drawing more and more power to the presidency, making himself, in Lindbergh's phrasing of it, essentially a dictator. And Lindbergh thought this was terrible for the United States. So my story is the debate between these two men. It's a debate over whether to enter the war against Germany. But in a larger sense, it's a debate over America's role in the world. Should the United States, must the United States take a leading position in world affairs? Lindbergh's side says, no, we have not done this for the first 150 years of America's national existence, and we should not start now. If we start down that path, there will be no end. We will find ourselves fighting on every continent in conflicts that have no direct connection to American security. But Roosevelt said, yes, we must. The world has become unstable. The world has become dangerous to democracy and to American prosperity. And if we don't prevent this sort of thing in the future, we'll be fighting more wars than even World War I and World War II. So this is the story. I was moved to write it because, well, first of all, I had known the story. I teach American history, and so I cover this ground every year when I go over it in my class. But in the 2010s, specifically after Donald Trump got elected the first time, this question of America's position in the world once again became a politically live issue. From the moment of Pearl Harbor in 1941 through about 2015, there never was a president who questioned the belief that the United States needed to be the leader of the world. Donald Trump did. And I thought, okay, well, this debate is coming back. And because Donald Trump's campaign had adopted the label America First, this was taken from the America First Committee, of which Lindbergh in the debate over World War II is the principal voice. They themselves had raised this issue of, let's go back to this earlier time. And so a lot of preconceptions swirled around this concept of America First. And it's fair to say that Lindbergh's side of the argument had been given short shrift from the moment of Pearl Harbor, which seemed to prove him wrong. And he'd been seen as not simply wrong, but as misguided, as ignorant, just a malign figure in American history. And I thought, I'm sort of a contrarian by nature. And I thought, well, let's go back and see what the debate looked like as it was developing, with the potentially added bonus that, well, it looks like we're engaging in the debate once again over whether the United States should be, must be, the leader of the world. So I wrote the book, and it was published last fall before Donald Trump got elected the second time. But Donald Trump is once again the president, and he is once again casting serious doubt over America's existing commitments to NATO, for example, to America's other allied partners. And it looks as though we might be shifting back in the direction of where the United States was before the big debate that I cover in my book. So that's the story, and that's the reason I wrote the book.